the French President Emmanuel Macron and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer have vowed unwavering support for Ukraine. I'm going to read into this more from the BBC, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with an article from the BBC with the headline that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, have both vowed unwavering support for Ukraine. France and the UK will support Ukraine for as long as necessary to thwart Russia's aggression of war, the French President Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer have both said. Guys, while you're here, make sure you hit the like button and share it across social media so others are notified of this video. So before I read into it, I'd like to give my initial thoughts. Now, obviously, why is this? What is the need for this? Well, I think this is a sign of, to show a sign of strength despite the recent elections that have taken place across the pond over in America. Obviously, there have been worrying signs that perhaps Ukraine will no longer have the support it needs. Now, at the moment, the talk can be that Europe and the UK are united in their support for Ukraine and unwavering and whatnot. But I generally believed before the election that Ukraine would cease to exist if Trump became president. No, Trump has become president. Now, do I still believe that? Honestly, I don't know. I'm hoping that I am wrong, and I'm hoping that Ukraine does not cease to exist. My partial thinking was that Ukraine may have to give up territory, which I don't think is right. But I generally do fear for them if America decides to pull out all of its support for Ukraine. Now, there is a lot of talk, and we'll have to wait and see how things come about. But I do fear for Ukraine's future, despite the strength of unity from Britain and France here. And the majority of the EU most EU nations are in support of Ukraine. There are obviously some of them who are against it, but Europe should be concerned about Russia's aggression, because obviously if it's not enough for Vladimir Putin to just take Ukraine. We know that he's eyeing up the Baltic states. We know he's looking at Poland, and we should be concerned by that. Poland have really, really pumped out quite a military force, from my understanding, over the past several years. I wouldn't say it'd be able to stop Russia, but it certainly would pack a punch. And the Baltics have been preparing, for quite a while, and of course Finland will always be ready to fight. You know, the likes of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania will also be very much concerned should Ukraine fall as well. But this support here, while it does seem good on paper, a good image to show that they still stand united, will we still be united in support for Ukraine in, let's say, 6 months' time? Have to wait and see, won't we? So the Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Paris as a guest of Macron on Monday, and held a meeting with the French counterpart to talk about Russia's invasion and stopping illegal migration in the Channel. A statement from the Elysee Palace said the two leaders have reaffirmed their commitment to support Ukraine unwaveringly. The meeting comes as questions are being asked about US President-elect Donald Trump's support for Ukraine after he said he could end the war in one day. Well, when he's elected president, we'll find out what he does on his very first day, if he will end it in one day. Macron initially personally invited the Prime Minister to mark the 120th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale between France and the UK, which paved the way for greater diplomatic cooperation between the two countries. Statement said the two leaders have reaffirmed their commitment to support Ukraine unwaveringly, as long as it is necessary to thwart Russia's war of aggression. A further statement from Downing Street said the pair discussed how to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going into the winter. There were no details on whether the two leaders would support allowing Ukraine to use long-range Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russian territory. So I've covered this quite extensively on World News Round. I've talked about the Storm Shadow missiles on World News Round and on Snowflake Corner's live stream. News from outside the UK, news I cover from particularly outside the UK. And I will say is that I understand the concerns about it, because obviously it enables them more into direct conflict with Russia. But at this point, it's kind of like, well, they're already technically in conflict with Russia. They're just doing it through Ukraine at this point. So I personally think they should just allow it. Me personally. The key decision maker as far as London and Paris are concerned remain President Biden, who has so far not given Ukraine permission to use long-range missile targets inside Russia for fear of escalation. Downing Street said no war was ever won by a single weapon when asked whether the UK was speaking to President Biden about the potential use of their missiles. A number 10 spokeswoman says our position on Storm Shadow hasn't changed. We've always aimed that where we discuss our support for Ukraine, we will do so in terms of broader strategy to ensure Ukraine is in the strongest possible position going forward, particularly in the winter. And we've also been very clear that no war has ever been won by a single weapon. Questions have been raised following Trump's presidential election victory about what is the second term could mean for US support for Ukraine and NATO. Over the weekend, the Washington Post reported Trump had already spoken to Vladimir Putin, urging the Russian leader not to further escalate the war. Have to wait and see on that one. The Kremlin denied a phone call took place, claiming the Washington Post article does not correspond at all to reality. Interesting. That's interesting. There were other stories saying that they had a phone call. Okay. Macron thanks Keir for being the first British leader at the Chancellor's ST ceremony since Winston Churchill in 1944. During the Armistice Day commemorations, Keir also met French Prime Minister Michel Barnier before observing a minute's silence. Keir and Macron laid the wreath at the statue of Churchill in Paris and travelled an open roof car to review troops around the Arc de Triomphe. I know I'm going to mispronounce that word. I know. Apologise. During the meeting, Keir and Macron also committed to cooperation on migration and channel, particularly in the face of human trafficking networks. Statements there. Okay, let me hit this one because I know some people are going to be kicking off about this. Until we set up legal routes for people to come to the UK, there will always be boats crossing. There will always be boats crossing. There will always be people coming across. There will always be people trying to smuggle into vehicles. Until you give a legal way for people to come to the UK, you are always going to have these issues. You know, people have a problem with illegal migration. That's because there's no legal route for them to come. Unless you are from Hong Kong, unless you are from Ukraine, then you cannot come legally to the UK. That is the problem. So until you have that, you will always have this issue. So it doesn't matter what they talk about in terms of the migration. The pair discussed European security and the prospects of the relationship between the EU and the UK, alongside further discussion of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Gaza, if you want me to hear talk about Gaza, I cover various videos on Gaza on the Rumble page. The links for the Rumble channel, the link is down below if you want to check that out. Finally, the two leaders reiterate their desire to deepen in bilateral relations, particularly in the areas of security and defence, the statement said. Earlier, the UK Defence Secretary John Henley said if the reports of the call were correct, then President Trump is exactly right to warn Putin against escalation in Ukraine. Speaking to BBC Breakfast, he said he expects the United States to remain steadfast in its support for Ukraine due to the strength of the bipartisan support in the country. You expect them to stand by support? Not sure about that one. We have stepped up our support for Ukraine. We're speeding up the delivery of aid, and we're spending more now on Ukraine and supporting Ukraine than we've ever done before. The bit that blinds me off is that that the United States remains steadfast in its support of Ukraine. He said United States. He didn't say Donald Trump. That's an interesting point. The UK and France have said backing Ukraine against Russia is essential when it comes to protecting the European continent as a whole. Trump had previously told NATO members to increase defence spending, saying that he would let aggressors such as Russia do whatever the hell he wants to those who do not. Bryson Lysia, who worked on Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, told the BBC that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has to have a realistic vision for peace, which would not involve ending the Russian annexation of Crimea. However, a spokesperson for Donald Trump distanced himself from the remarks, saying Mr. Lasagna does not speak for him. Interesting. The Armistice meeting between Starmer and Macron comes as fighting between Ukraine and Russia intensifies. This is a very significant point. Exchanges at the weekend saw the largest drone attacks by both sides against each other since the start of the war, and Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted 84 Ukrainian drones over 6 regions, including some approaching Moscow. On Sunday, Treasury Minister Darren Jones told BBC's One Law Queensborough programme that the government wanted to increase defence spending from 2.3% to 2.5% on national income. However, it did not say when the target would be reached or whether it would be met before the next election, which could be held in 2029 at the latest. We'll have to wait and see on that, to be fair. There's quite a lot of information to take in on board there. Some interesting comments here saying that the US will continue its support for Ukraine. Time will tell on that, especially when the Trump administration comes in. And some of the comments there that have been made, and Donald Trump distancing himself from Mr. Lavrentse's comments about ending the Russian annexation of Crimea. That's a very interesting point, I have to say, on that as well. So definitely some food for thought. Definitely some food for thought on that. It's for sure, guys. I mean, it's a very nice touch, I would say, from Starmer to show that solidarity with France. It will be interesting when the Trump administration actually goes in, how the EU and the UK respond to whatever actions Trump does when it comes to his tariffs, and how he reacts to the war in Ukraine as well as the conflicts in the Middle East. But I think the EU and the UK are preparing all possibilities, and they need to. You need to prepare for they need to prepare for multiple scenarios, because we just don't know what Trump is going to always do. It's not always very clear what he's going to do. Sometimes he just does something just like that, and you don't even realize it. So they just need to be on the ready for whatever comes, as that's what I will say. But a nice way of support, but it's again, are we going to see this in 6 months' time, in a year's time? So what do you guys think? What do you guys make of this story of Macron and Starmer saving their unwavering support of Ukraine? What do you make of America's position in all of this? Do you honestly think they're going to keep support for Ukraine, considering most supporters of Trump don't want any more support for Ukraine? So if that's the case, then what's going to happen? Lots of questions, not enough answers. Let me know your thoughts and more on this down in the comments section below. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button. We greatly appreciate it. Share this across social media so others are notified of this video. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing, because it really does help support the channel. If you want to go one step further and financially support me and the work that I do here, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member for as little as 99p, or join me on Rumble or Patreon for exclusive content on those platforms. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.